Welcome back to the Real Estate Reserve Podcast. Jason Balen, Hard Money Bankers, co-host Ian Horowitz from Equity Warehouse. We're tuning in today, solo, no guest, but definitely a bunch of things on our mind that we wanted to discuss. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. If you're a return viewer, follower, watcher of the show, thanks again for all your support. We like to have a lot of fun on this show. We also like to keep it educational. When we do bring guests in, we don't bring any gurus. We're bringing in actual operators and real estate investors, business owners that are actually helping all of us. Part of the topic today is a review of a book that one of our guests wrote. He was on the show a few weeks ago, so we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about some of the podcasts that we are listening to and that we're kind of getting engaged in. You know, it's interesting, right? Because depending on where you're at in your business or really like what season you're in kind of changes the type of content that you're listening in, right? Sometimes I'm like all marketing content or all personal finance content or all personal development content or just like random content. And, you know, we're going to go through all of that. Ian and I were talking, you know, we typically read books, or I should say listen to books on a similar pace. And then we review them afterwards. And I think we went pretty strong for a few years where we were both reading, you know, in the dozens of books a year. And like, I haven't read all that many or listened to that many this year just because I've been doing a lot of podcast stuff. I listen to a lot of podcast stuff. And, you know, some of those episodes are as long as, you listen to a few of those episodes, there's a book. So,
right.
Yeah, that's what we're going to dive into today. If you're a regular viewer of the show, you know that at the end of every episode, we ask people what book recommendation they have. So that actually or podcast, and that actually helps our reading list. We're constantly going to Audible and downloading the book, and we're constantly putting in our notes section of, check out this podcast episode or check out this book. So that's where we're at today.
Yeah. No, I'm excited. I know sometimes people find, we do these episodes probably about once a year where we talk about this, but it is important and it is fun. And, I think to your point, listening to other podcasts, listening to this podcast, whatever it may be, it's sometimes you just want the information in real time. Like, what are people seeing in real time? What are they hearing? What are they doing? What's their views on the world in that real time? Whereas I think the books, you get more broad stroke type concepts, and you're like, as an example, we've talked about, and we'll get to Wealth Elevator here in a minute because it was a great reminder, but we've talked about Who Not How. We've talked about Buy Back Your Time, right? And those are the broad stroke concepts, but then you need to go find the podcast to be like, okay, well, how are people implementing that today? Like Hormozi talks about hiring high dollar employees to then be able to scale your business. And we talk about it all the time. It's like, man, I'd love to hire that $250,000 a year employee or get my employees to that point where they're completely bought in. And it's like, okay, well, that makes sense. So it's like, you need the combination of the two to hear like the concepts out of the books that then apply to the podcast that you're listening to. And I think both of us have been implementing a lot of strategies over the past year or two that has forced the hand to be a little more into the podcast realm. Like example, we read what is it, the Banker's Code? What is it? I don't have it, but the one about infinite banking. And then it's, that sounds like a really good idea. Now let's go consume every podcast. Did you see this YouTube video? Did you see this podcast? And I think a lot of that's taken place over the last year or two.
Well, I also like, the book can kind of teach you education of the topic. And then sometimes you can get relevant case studies from a podcast episode that I like. So, like for instance, Being Too Subtle from Sam Zell was a book that both of us really, really enjoyed. And I loved it. And whenever the book was written, I don't remember. But, after that book was written, it's like, I want more content related to Sam because I want to do what he does because he's a gangster and a killer. And like, he's great at real estate. And what I would do is I would go on, the podcast platforms and I would just Google his name to try to find interviews. Right. And then there was an interview that was on Tim Ferriss's podcast. I freaking loved it. Right. And then he'd be on, some financial news channel podcast. And I like that as well. So I like the relevant, the newer relevant stuff. Not that some of this stuff's not out of date, but I like the newer stuff with case studies. Like I like hearing real life examples on stuff. I think that's why I really like Hermosi's podcast, is because every one of his episodes, he's typically talking about a business that he's invested in a different line, and it's not just his core business. So I love hearing what other business owners are doing inside their business to find something that's relevant inside our business. And you can find that when you're, when these guys are actively doing case studies. One other thing to note, which I think is important, is there's a lot of times that I believe, and I think Ian, you probably agree with this too, is you kind of, it has to be in like the right place at the right time. Like somebody could tell you something every day for 10 years and you're just not ready for it. You're just not in that right spot. And then that one day it clicks. It's like, God damn it, I'm a dummy. Like that makes so much sense. I'm ready for this now. And it could just be you weren't ready for it, or it could just be that it wasn't presented to you the right way. And now you're at a spot that, that it clicks. There's a few things, and, I know you kind of leaked earlier that we're going to talk about the Wealth Elevator book. And Lean was on our podcast weeks ago. It was pretty simple, some of that stuff. But there's a few things that clicked where I never really thought of it that way. And I'm like, I'm glad you presented it that way. Some people just have that voice that you can relate to, and it's just the way that they describe it compared to others. There's a lot of podcasters and even people and even authors that I don't like the way that their voice comes off, and it's hard for me to, get the information, absorb the information just because it's the way it's presented.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think that's a lot of what it comes down to the book. And like Lane was talking about it on our podcast, and then you're like, "Hey, I picked it up," and I was like, "Dude, why'd you pick up such a simple book?" And I'm actually intrigued of like what piqued your interest to it. And then we can get into the nitty gritty, because it was, what I find is I don't care how simple the book is. It's good to hear reminders of why you've started to do this, right? Like as an example, I mean, Michael Jordan had a coach forever, right? The top athletes all have coaches. And what are they doing? They are working on the basic skill sets that got them to where they are today. And I think it's too easy nowadays to hear all the noise out there of all the different investing ideas, all these different ways to avoid taxes and all this other crap. But when in reality, you should just be focusing on one core thing. So, Jason, for you, what was it about that book that like piqued your interest? Was it because Lane was on the podcast and you're like, hey, this guy spoke well and I wanted to see the book? Or did the book like speak to you and you're like, hey, I need something to read?
No, I think he was, because he was on the podcast and I related to a lot of the things that he was talking about, and he did it in a simple way. And then he talked about, his book being the Wealth Elevator, and how in essence, sometimes you start at the ground floor, sometimes you start at floor 1, and you got to get all the way up to floor 10 of what the super wealthy, the super rich legacy investors are doing. And, each floor kind of represents something different. So I'm like, oh, hey, let's see, what floor am I on? Type of situation. At some points I'm on this floor, other points I'm on this floor. Tax saving strategies, I'm on a lower floor than I might be on, cash flowing business strategies, right? And he was talking about what a lot of his clients that he works with are at, and the types of deals that he was doing. And I'm like, there was just a few things that he talked about that really, really, really clicked. So I'm like, yeah, like the whole premise of the book, I'm trying to find what the subtitle of the book was. I know it's called The Wealth Elevator. I want to see if there's a subtitle that potentially sparked my interest. Real estate syndications, accredited investing banking, and tax strategies for first generation millionaires. Right. And I don't know, it just was interesting. Right. I'm always like, I like to chase some shiny objects sometimes. And I like that he was an operator and he wasn't just kind of a guru. We'll interview people on our podcast sometimes, and, we'll get offline, or we'll talk, or, we'll see people on social media, or we'll talk to people like, yeah, that guy's not battle tested enough. Right. He's too opinionated on one thing, and he hasn't been around the block long enough. And I don't know. I just felt like some of the stuff that Lane talked about, not necessarily deal specific deal, but just overall like thought process deal, made a lot of sense. You want me to dig into one of the things that I really like that he said?
Yeah, sure.
And
Go
then
ahead.
and you can kind of go with some takeaways as well, and then we'll talk about some other podcasts that we're, been binging as well. But one of the things that I really liked that he discussed, and big takeaway, and some of this I do, some of this I don't, but I think it's just huge, is most people when they're younger or they're just getting started, might not have to be younger, but just getting started, is they work backwards. And what I mean by that, or what he means by that, is, they work backwards and they're like, okay, I got this job, I'm making like decent income, and I'm going to start saving for retirement. And, they start plowing money into retirement. They use some, tax strategies. Maybe they've got some young kids and they do 529s, and they do things like that. But, they're constantly kind of grinding, making some money, and, they start saving. And then you kind of get to the point where, like, he just discussed this, that you're working backwards on this. Like, you're worrying about legacy stuff and saving for retirement and all this other stuff before, more than you're worried about day one. And like the day one goal should, everything you should be doing day one should be moving forward to try to get passive income. And after you get passive income lined up, then you can worry about everything else, because then you have 100% freedom to do whatever that is. And he said that a lot of his clients and students that he works with, their goal, a lot of them are, successful real estate investors and successful business owners, is they try to get to like 25-ish, $30,000 a month in passive income. And that's a lot. Don't get me wrong. But the goal of that is, well, after they can work to do that, then they can worry about putting money into IRAs and 401ks and legacy types of stuff. But the goal is to make as much money as you can in order to get and put them into alternative investments in order to make high rates of return. Like, what's the point of putting in something that's going to make you, there's no point even putting in anything that's low, that's conservative, that's low risk, because it's just such a small rate of return, and it's going to take a lifetime for it to grow into anything substantial. So it was more of like a fast track plan of doing this in 5 years or 10 years instead of taking it 50 years to accomplish the same thing. And that's hard. It's not traditional. It's scary. And it wasn't necessarily quitting your job. If you like your job and you're a high wage earner, let's figure out ways that you can make more and more and more money. So you can take that money and still invest it, but invest it in higher return types of assets, real estate syndications, things like that. And obviously a big part of that was him promoting the syndications that he was doing, no doubt, and he believes in them. But the goal is to achieve 10, 20, 30% returns, on active investments, and not 4% returns that are going to take you forever. And that made a lot of sense. And then he kind of talked about locked equity and about, how, if you bought a property, you probably have equity in this thing several years later. And this, maybe you do have a company 401k plan and you have money in there, but that's locked equity that you can't necessarily do. Imagine if you can leverage some of that stuff and come up with hundreds of thousands of dollars or $1 million of locked equity that's not really creating a good return, and put that into, an active investment. I mean, let's be honest. If you can get a 20% return, and I know 20% returns are hard unless you're actively investing, but $1 million spits you out $200,000, right?
Yeah, no, and
$17,000 a month.
Yeah, well, 100%. And that's what I think the one piece that you kind of glazed over is the fact that, I agree. And I've always kind of lived that premise. People always said, oh, you're not saving for the future. And it's not that I'm not saving for a future. It's like, why wouldn't you create like a defined benefit plan today when you're living and healthy and executing on that, right? And I think a lot of people are always like, okay, well, I'm saving for the future. I worked in an industry where there wasn't a future. You had a moment's notice, you're gone. Like, my father-in-law did all this stuff for the future, and he's dead 18 months after retiring and didn't have any quality of life afterwards. So why not have that defined benefit plan today. And I think Lane does a good job of talking about, like you were alluding to, of, well, all those other things are great savings vehicles when you have enough money. Just like the stock market's probably a great savings vehicle, or a long-term wealth storage vehicle when you have a lot of money to dump it. In the interim, you should be actively working towards creating a financial goal of whatever works for you, but it should be all passive. So for us, and I think we fit into his book pretty well, it's that $25,000 to $50,000 a month range of saying, when you achieve this passively, and yes, we're active business owners, so this actually does resonate to us. It makes us think more of either A, scaling our business to where it becomes more passive, or B, finding alternative asset classes to diversify a little bit in while still investing in our own businesses, because we have great investment vehicles, but creating additional revenue streams. And I know one thing for me is, well, if I could take some cash out and give it to Jason and Chris, technically that's passive to me, and I could earn some returns. And the same way that Jason could put some money with me and earn some passive returns. So I think it's ultimately being able to find that blend between you actively running it and how much money you can earn taking your active income and putting it into what people call passive investments. And he does a good job talking about the reason behind the offsetting of taxes and everything else. But I think the important takeaway is getting to that 25 to 30 grand a month nut coming out to you. And if you're only making 5 or 10 grand a month right now, you're like, holy shit, that's a lot of money. Really, it's not, because you're just doubling your 5 grand or your 10 grand, right, a month. And in the same sense, to get to that number, it's not a lot of money, but it is. And it gives you enough of a lifestyle that allows you to save a legit amount of money every year, that allows you to invest it, that allows you to double it every several years, that gives you that compounding interest to give you not only the quality of life for you and your family and your friends, but it gives you that legacy that you're able to pass on as well.
Well, and also, Lane might not have described it like this, but Alex Hermosi describes this all the time about betting on yourself. So for instance, like you get a $50,000 hit on a real estate flip. That doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, hey, I'm going to go put this in this to start trying to create $500 a month in passive income. But what you can do is bet on yourself and use that money for education or reinvest in your business and try to do more deals and turn that 50,000 into more. And like, stop worrying about longer term stuff. And it's challenging depending on your personality type. I mean, my personality type will prevent me from just going all in to all in to all in to all in to all in. I'm not going to do that. But I think it kind of opened my eyes of like, hey, like you have a lot of equity in your primary residence. Why? Like it's locked equity. It's not doing much. You're right. Hey, you have a 401k that, you contribute to because, you get a tax break on the front end because it's still set up as a traditional IRA. What's that money doing for you? And all good points. And yeah, the market's been fine and it's got a good double-digit rate of return and things like that, but it's still locked and it could turn into other bigger things. And the goal isn't to necessarily just be a risk taker. That's not what I think he was trying to portray. The goal for him was, and the goal of the wealth elevator is, you might be on the bottom floor, like just graduate high school, just graduate college, have no money, have no resources, and you got to start somewhere, right? But then as you work your way up, like I'm looking at it as like, okay, well, how do I get to the top floor as quick as possible? Because the top floor as quick as possible is a certain amount of passive income for you, no matter what. And then everything else is legacy stuff, right? And it depends. Some people take a longer time to get up there. The point is, and I think the point of what he was trying to portray is, listen, everybody wants to be diversified and be safe, and I get that, and I do as well. But I think what he was trying to portray is, it's up to you how fast you want to take this elevator up to the top. And the fastest way to do it is to continue to go all in, on yourself, continue to make more and more money, put it into high return, tax beneficial investment vehicles to reduce your taxes, gain your income, turn that into passive income. And then, the sky's the limit of what you can do after that. And that when the way he, I'm not doing it justice the way that he talked about it, but I was like, damn, like that's accurate. There's no point to be socking away a few $100s a month for retirement in 20, 30, 40 years, depending on how old you are, 10 years until you have all your stuff in order right now and spinning it out.
But I just think, like, I looked at the evolution through me. I think his book early on, where I was financially, is probably not the right book for me. The right book for me then was probably more of a Dave Ramsey get out of debt style and take that like crazy thought process. But then, like, if you're conflicting your morals of like, well, why should I pay my house off? I think Lane does a very well job of speaking to that middle market, upper market of saying you can pay your house off. Let's just use $500,000 as an example, or let's use $1 million as an example. For round number sakes, you could pay that off and save $6,000 a month. But what if you took that same $1 million that you had to pay your house off and you could put it into an investment that gets you, 15 to 20% returns? That's going to far outpace it. And that's the quote unquote good debt of the world, right? If you can't sleep at night, fine, pay your house off, whatever. In the end, I think ultimately that is an example of utilizing good debt and betting on yourself and saying, okay, man, that $1 million will be worth $2 million in 5 to 7 years. Well, then at that point, I could look at paying my house off, right? He talks about selling your house every several years as there's under $500,000 of trapped equity to take the tax benefit of. And yeah, listen, sounds great on paper. But when I was an early fireman, I couldn't even fathom buying a house. Now today, it's like, wow, yeah, you got a point. I do have $500,000 of locked equity. How do I tap that, leverage it, and continue to grow it the same way that you would grow your infinite banking policies or anything along those lines? And I think overall, he did a very good job. And I did, if you're advanced, I think you get a ton of takeaways from it and a lot of good baseline reminders. And if you're in that mid tier, you're going to get a lot of aha moments to say, what should I do next? And if you're at the beginning level, you're going to go, holy shit, this is overwhelming. But it's going to give you an idea of what you should be looking for or what you should be striving to do there in the future. And if you want to be an active investor, there's takeaways there too. You want to be a passive investor, there's a ton of takeaways.
Yeah.
So I would say it's very rare do we have a guest on that we're like, oh yeah, you got a book. I was just trying to sell stuff. And then we go listen to it. It's like, oh shit, this was actually a really good book that I think everybody should take a.
And it wasn't super advanced or super like, oh man, this is revolutionary. It was just some simple tactics that just for some reason hit and made a lot of sense. And like, here's another thing. You're like, oh, well, how am I going to find a 15 or 20% return? And, obviously your interest rate, your return on capital is going to depend on if you're active or if you're, passive in the investment. But, think about it. You get into a syndication. These are the examples that he was using. You get into a syndication, 8% pref. And then, that pref turns into, you have equity in that as well. Right. So, as the thing continues to grow, you're getting equity distributions as well. So that 8% gets maybe into double digits. Then you're getting the tax savings as well. And it's, in essence, his goal towards that end of the book was getting you out of W-2 income, an ordinary income, and getting into investment income in order to reduce tax brackets, reduce tax liabilities. So it was an adjusted yield of that. I'm not saying it's like, oh, hey, just put your money here and you get a 20% return. Like that's hard to find unless you're active. But the goal is to try to be, use your time to try to find deals to be involved in on a passive side or an active side. And I think most people, it's funny because he's like, I don't wholesale, that's dumb. I don't flip properties, that's dumb. I buy income producing real estate, and but only on a high level. And when everyone starts, they got to start with wholesaling a property if you don't have much money, or flipping a property. And making $20,000 on a $100,000 flip, call it, and you make a 20% return, like that's great. But then over time, you get higher up in the in the ladder, and you say, hey, cool. Well, I bought this commercial property, and I was able to make $200,000 on that deal. Like, it takes time to do. It doesn't happen overnight. The point is as you're growing, and then as you get onto higher floors, we've talked about in other episodes, in infinite banking policies, where in essence your money's working twice for you. He's had examples of how it can work 3 times for you. But like, for instance, you put okay, I made $100,000 on this flip, right? Okay, now I put $100,000 in this infinite banking policy, and it's growing, at several points a month or several points a year, right? It grows at a decent. I don't know. Ours has grown at what 4 or 5% year over year on that, and then you take a loan on it to go invest in something else, so your money's still compound interest working. You're taking the loan out at simple interest. And then you go invest in the next asset that way, right? So you have two things going. And that was more advanced strategies, and that's something that Ian and I have been doing for years. But the point is you start kind of where you're at the ground floor or the floor one, and then as you're growing, and like the top priority is cash flow. And it's bringing in money and bringing as much money as you can. Because as soon as that's coming in and that's in order, then you can start investing in things. And if you have, a high paying job, it's like, great, let's take some of the money from this high paying job and put it into something else. I can't actively run those things because I'm already busy at this stuff. Great. Put them into a passive investment, maybe get some tax savings from that, have a decent adjusted, rate of return, understanding rule of 72, dividing the interest rate by 72. So, how long it's going to take to double your money. We've always had a goal internally to try to get a 14.5% return on any investment we've ever done. So we can double that every 5 years. That's just kind of a rule of thumb, not ever really investing in anything that I can't achieve less than that return, because that's the way that I pro forma things up. So again, people have different views on this particular topic, but that was Lane's view. And personally, I agreed with a lot of it.
Yeah. And it was a great reminder. I think that's the biggest thing. And I think that's why you got to read the books. And I was joking around with Jason. I said, I might toss that one on an annual basis just because it's just a very simple, direct book. Overall, how do you apply it? How do you take it to that next level? That's totally up to you. And if you're going to go take those advanced strategies before you take the initial strides, you're going to fail miserably. There's no point in having $100,000 a year infinite banking policy if you can't save the money and put it in. It's useless, right? And I hear a lot of guys in different groups, and it stressed me out. They're selling a property and sweating depreciation recapture. They're sweating how they're going to get out of taxes. They put themselves on clock for 1031s. And Lane says it great in the book, and it's honestly something Jason and I have been talking about a lot, is we got some deals that we're getting ready to sell and come up on. And he's like, hey, you got a nice bank of depreciation and passive losses. I said, yeah. So my first couple $1 million of sales, I'm free and clear. Well, what was the key there? We continued to buy real estate. We didn't sweat the 1031s or any of those other things. We saw one of our apartment buildings. We cleared, $300,000, something like that, each. And guess what? I paid no tax on it. So I think taking that time and not so much sweating about the minutia of how am I going to avoid taxes, but continuing to do the right thing, continuing to make money, continuing to buy properties, you're going to end up in a situation where you're not going to have a tax implication, right? And I think, and I believe, not so much think, I believe as long as you're always continuing to do real estate, I will be in a good position. And then when I get to the terminal end of my life, that my kids will have the stepped up basis. Yes, I might toss an irrevocable trust in here and there. I might do some other goofy stuff between here and there, but so as long as they get the stepped up basis when I pass, then they will be in a, the execution model would then be, hey, you got these life insurance policies, go sell off this real estate. It'll be your best opportunity to do it. Get it off the books, take that cash, and then you go to the next level. So I do like the legacy play, and I do like the internal not sweating. How do I avoid taxes today? And tripping over that. And I think that's part of the reason why I've always had trauma around selling properties, and we've gotten much better with it as we've sold and not really been taxed, and really learning, like, I haven't been taxed because of this. So actually, I think Jason and I might do a fun episode here in the future about depreciation recapture as we go through it in real time and learn all about it. But these are all things that Lane talks about as well in the book that were good reminders of like stuff that we've been talking about going, I don't know if we're right. Boom, he talks about it in the next chapter that I listened to, right? So,
yeah. So are we good with this episode, or should we talk about some other stuff we're listening to? I mean, it went longer than expected. I was a little bit nervous that we, we'd be like, yeah, that's what it is. And then episode over, but we got pretty, passionate and down and gritty in it. And that's what it was. I mean, I talked to you several times on the phone, after I
Yeah.
finished reading it, and then you got through this in a few days pretty quickly. And again, like, it's nothing revolutionary, but for some reason it kind of hit home on some of the stuff, especially like, you got to get your passive income in order, like work on that, forget savings for all these other like things, like just grind. And like, I think the way that he does things with his students is he tries to help them in like 5 years of like, listen, this is our 5-year plan. It's not gonna be freaking easy, but then everything else in place. And I talk about it all the time. And I have a pretty lofty passive income goal that I'm trying to hit, and it hasn't happened quickly. It hasn't happened overnight, but like it will happen, and it'll get to that where we all kind of have that set up. I like the a third rule. That's what I've always kind of used, and most of my stuff is ordinary income or interest income. So it's hard for me to get tax deductions on a lot of stuff, but I've always kind of had the third, like, a third I can do whatever the hell I spend, do whatever I want with. A third goes to taxes, and a third goes to savings. And I think if you follow a formula similar to that, doesn't have to be that, but similar to that, you're always going to be in a good spot. And then people are like, well, you're not going to need to continue to save after you hit that certain amount. And it's like, yeah, you kind of do, right? Like, think about what, your household expenses were today, or think about what your household expenses are today compared to where they were in 2019, like pre-COVID. Like, things went up a lot, and like it was unexpected, and it's going to continue to. Ian and I had a conversation today and said, hey, what number, what dollar number would I have, dollar amount, sorry, would I have to give you today in today's dollars, and you weren't allowed to save any of it? You had to spend it. You can only use it to spend it, right? So in essence, like, what dollar amount, if I gave you today, would last you for the rest of your life? Now, first off, define what the rest of your life is. If you're in your mid 40s, Ian thinks he's done at 80.
I don't know. I just cracked a tooth. I'm sitting here sweating bullets. The end of the world's coming.
A lot of people are living into their hundreds, and in 50 years from now, it might be a lot different. I mean, think about I don't know what 50 years looked like. I know what 40 years looked like, but like the difference then compared to difference now, like think about what you could buy 40 years from ago, so imagine what that stuff's going to cost in 40 years from now. So like, if I was like, hey, I'll give you $30 million, a shit ton of money. If I give you 30 million bucks, can you last the rest of your life on that money? Now, the answer is yes, if you invest that money. But if you're like, you have $30 million and, tomorrow you're going to have 29 million and blah, 900 something thousand, and you had to live off principal, how long could that last for? And I don't know the answer to that, but I'm willing to bet that it's not enough. I'm willing to bet that $30 million, even though that says it's a crazy number, but you're not allowed to invest it. So in essence, everything you buy or you spend money on is deducted from that principal. I don't think you can live the rest of your life with that amount of money. And
well, right, because the point is, and I think if people are picking up what you're putting down, it's not that you're going to change your lifestyle because you have $30 million. It's because inflation. Look at 2019 into today. Everything's 1.5 times more. I used to sit here and fight with some guys in Jason's office, Mr. Glenn over there, and I would say, dude, like, just go out and make more money. Like, you need to continue to make money. Like, I want to make $1 million a year, right? Like, oh fuck, you need that much money for us because you need to make that much money, and I haven't achieved that goal, just FYI. But why do you need to make that kind of money? You want to make that kind of money because when massive upswings in that happen, you need to be able to do it. So that $30 million might seem cool today, and you're living on $100,000 a year this year, $50,000 this year, right? And you pay your house off over that time, you pay off whatever other stuff you have over that time, but things are increasingly getting more, and that velocity, that compounding velocity on the expense side is outpacing the compounding velocity on your income side. And I believe that's where the mistake happens. And you have a service to you and your family to go out and make as much money as humanly possible. And if you can continue to do that, then you will be in a good position. And home runs will happen, singles will happen, doubles, triples, they'll all happen. And you will continue to outpace the growth of expenses and taxes. And you don't have to sweat those conversations then. Just go out and enjoy your life. It is very easy to make money. Go do it.
Yeah, I'm trying to Google some stats from 1985, 40 years ago, compared to where they're going to be 40 years from now. And I don't know. I mean, this is an interesting conversation.
Chat GPT will know.
Yeah, I mean, we can write some formulas for it all, but it doesn't matter. The point is you get it, right? Like, you got to continue, keep your foot on the gas, keep the momentum coming. If you turn your active income to passive income, you'll be unstoppable, right? Nobody will be able to stop you. And that's the point. And the goal of all of this is, I've always had passive income goals, not necessarily active income goals, because the passive income is where it's at, where nobody can really take that away from you. As long as you're responsibly investing that into good assets, you're going to be in a good spot. And
all right.
I'm
going to cut you off and ask you this. Is there a world that you think you would ever view Hard Money Bankers as like passive income? Do you could scale it and be like, all right, that's now a passive investment vehicle to me, and I have capital there and it spits me out rates of returns and I got a full team working? Yes, you have a little bit more responsibility than the standard, but
I mean, it's active and passive. I mean, I got it. I mean, it's both. I have the active side of running the business. I have the passive side of using my personal money to invest in notes, in promissory notes that my company originates.
Yeah.
So it's both. It's both. And and that's part of it. And I think a real estate investor or developer should think of it the same way, right? Like, let's say, you're flipping houses. I personally don't think you should be using company cash to flip houses. I think you should distribute that cash to yourself. You're already getting taxed on it if you have an LLC, and then taking that cash, lending it to the company, or, even if you don't lend it to the company, like separating it in some capacity where your cash is making a return. Because a lot of flippers are flipping houses with cash, and then they look back, it's like, oh yeah, I made 20 grand. It's like, yeah, but you also tied up, $200,000 for a year. You could have made that same amount of money passively with a lot less risk and a lot less headache. Like, you're just enabling yourself to give yourself a job. Like, you have to differentiate the return on your capital compared to return on, the business. So mine are contingent on each other, right? But they're definitely separate, right? I'm making a passive return. Like, I'm either using my own personal money or I'm using someone else's money that's getting that return. When I have my own money in deals, I make twice as much money. I make the lending side of the money and I make the investor side of the money. It's like investing in a fund, right? Like, and you're a fund manager, you're making your fund manager side, and then you're either making that interest or that return on that fund to yourself, or you're paying another investor. So you're double dipping on it. And as a real estate developer, it's the same thing. And too many real estate developers don't take into consideration their own money, in the project. So it doesn't matter what you're in. If you're doing investment type of stuff, you gotta take in consideration the money that you're putting up and treat it as investment capital.
Yeah, I fully agree. Sorry, I was reading a message about a deal, that exact situation where I put money in as an LP. We were the GPs, and they are now saying they want to close in a very rapid rate. So I'm getting a little excited over here. We'll have to recap. We'll have to recap that deal when it closes. We'll keep it on the DL for a minute. So, but yeah, no, I agree. You should be distributing to yourself. You've received that tax position, and then come back around and then put the money back in and value your capital the same way you would value anyone else's capital. Why should you treat your capital any different than you would steward anyone else's? So,
no doubt.
With all that being said, I'm going to go to the dentist and figure out what the fuck is going on with my tooth. And guys, if you got any value out of this, I mean, there's tons of value here. If you want to learn more about any of this, go check out that book. We'll put it in the show notes. Go back and check out Lane's episode. It was really good. His episode of The Deal That Changed His Life should be coming out here shortly as well. With all that being said, if you guys have any value, please feel free to share the show. Since we're today's guests, so we will ask you to share Jason and I. We are going to be selfish and appreciate that if you do share it. Don't care about the likes and subscribes. With all that being said, guys, we will catch you on the next one.
Thanks for tuning in to the Real Estate Reserve podcast. Do us a favor and like, comment, and share our broadcast. It helps the algorithm and helps us spread the word too. Till next time, thank you for tuning in.